Hello and warm welcome to today's episode, and today I want to talk about how to use the Power BI Writeback functionality to write back to Sharepoint lists. So I got a couple of questions about this from customers and if this is possible, and the answer is well, of course it is. So I will cover this today. Actually, I will again give a very brief introduction of what this writeback functionality is about. And then I actually have two solutions how this works. One with a little bit of extra setup in Azure using a Logic app, and the other one is directly using the SharePoint REST APIs. Why there are two approaches. With Logic app, it's actually very easy, but it needs to have some setup in Azure. Using the REST APIs, it takes some efforts to set this up, basically because SharePoint REST APIs and service principals are a little bit harder to set up, but both work, and I will show you in a bit. So what does it look like? How can I demonstrate it? For that, I built a very simple Power BI report, what you can expect. So have a look at this. So here you see my very simple report. So what we want to end up with is that, like, having these fields here where you can just put in some kind of values that you can directly write that back to a SharePoint list. So I have like this SharePoint list over here, which has like task names, assigned, budget. And now I just written a new item here, do the laundry, and this item is now showing up. Also my report over here, I see, okay, the request was successful. To see the data, SharePoint list, it runs in import mode, so I have to refresh my data here to actually see the new values. But eventually I see also now this new table, it just got written here, 1010, so that's like the UTC timestamp, so this is all fine and good. So how do I set this up? Obviously, I'm using Translytical taskflows again. So let's have a look about Translytical taskflows. So the backbone of the writeback functionality is basically Translytical taskflows. That means you have these kind of visuals in Power BI now, or this functionality where you can trigger a so-called user data function in Fabric using parameters in a Power BI report, and actually also using kind of a button in Power BI report to actually activate that. So a user data function, it basically looks like this in Fabric, where you define some kind of custom logic, and we can use that logic to actually write back to specific data sources or trigger any kinds of actions. And one action in this case is how to write back to SharePoint. So I actually have two ways here. One is a very simple one using Logic apps, and the other one is using the SharePoint REST APIs. So let's have a look first on the Logic apps part. So to create a Logic app, you basically go to your Azure portal, look for Logic apps, and create one. So I'm using the consumption plan here, give it a nice resource group, a nice name, and a region. Not going into the specific settings here, set this appropriately, and then I just create it. So once it's deployed, what you want to do is go to the Logic App Designer here. We add a trigger. We use the request trigger here. So we get an HTTP, or we get an URL which you can trigger. So using a post method. And actually, the request body, it should contain all the kind of parameters you want to hand over from your user data function or from your Power BI writeback functionality. So what should be in there? So for my list here, I want to have like task name, assignee, budget, hand it over. Yeah. So I'm just copying that over. What is quite handy over here is you can also use the sample payload. So I'm just using this payload over here. So I have title, task name, assignee, and budget. Got a comma here, notifies me that, and then I see exactly how this should be put in here, that it knows which kind of JSON schema it should expect. Put in post over here again, and that's basically it. So I can call this HTTP request now. What I want to do now is to add a new action. And here we actually have the possibility to add SharePoint action. There's no specific one, at least I didn't find it, for creating a list item, but you have like send an HTTP request to SharePoint. So this is quite handy. Now the connection part is actually using your user. So we have to log in here. And once logged in, you can basically look for a specific site address. So I have like 2 addresses here, but you can also put in your custom value. Yeah. So if I use like this name here, like the tenant name, SharePoint sites standard team, that's the name of the site, and just put it in here. And now it depends what you want to do there, but for creating a new list item, we need like the post method. We need like the URI and hand over some parameters. So to write to the a new list item, the URI extension basically looks like this. And what you need as well is like 2 headers here. So we add the advanced parameters headers and body here. For headers, we have accept and content type. Both have the same value here. Application JSON, semicolon, OData equals verbose. So that's the same value here. And then for body, we actually have like the values here. And there's a specific field here, metadata type. And this actually differs for each list. Yeah, so it creates a specific item of a specific type here. To get this type, there's actually a little trick here. You can also call the API and you will get information about this list. So just use this extension here, put it at the end of your site name. So I'm using that one here. And if you execute this, you get some information on your screen. And what you want to look for is specifically the so-called list item identity type full name. Yeah. So you want to look at exactly for this. And here it's like the name of this entity type you are looking for. And with that being filled in here, you have this metadata field, and for title, now you actually want to use dynamic values, right? So you want to use the title you received from the HTTP request, the task name, the assignee. So I'm always where I want to fill in, I click this lightning button and then I choose this. Values, so obviously I need to put it in quotes without any spaces, and also have the comma there to make it a valid JSON. So double quotes over here. So this should be fine. So I'm saving that now, and now I can actually run it with a payload. So let's see if this works. Bring in the values over here, click on run, and let's see what happens. Status code 202 looks good. Let's look at SharePoint site. Here we go, we have the new value over here added. So the logic app works, and now it's pretty simple. I'm just looking at this HTTP request. I have like this URL over here. I mean, as I mentioned before, I didn't set up like authorization and access key and all that kind of stuff. So this is something you might want to do later on, but for this most simplest version, I can just take this URL now and basically write user data function, just calling this URL now and handing over this payload. Yeah, so I'm just putting in the URL over here. Then it's just doing like this post request with the parameters. This will actually trigger this logic app, and then it uses this connector to SharePoint to hand this over. And the user data function, that is something which I can now trigger via those Translytical task flows. Yeah, so looking at this button over here, I see I've action applied. I reference to data function which lives in this workspace, which is this function set here, and then a specific function in this function set which actually takes those parameters handed over by actually these text slice fields. So this is definitely one way how you can do it. As I mentioned, you might want to look into how to secure this logic app, how to make it more robust, and but the other way, without having to set up the logic app on Azure side, is actually a second way, and that's actually directly using the service principal and the REST API of the SharePoint. And to do that, what you need to do is some kind of prerequisite work. So what you want to do, if you want to use a service principal for the connection, the SharePoint REST APIs are actually requiring you to use a service principal which authenticates via certificate. So actually, I will link this documentation to the description of this video. Here's a documentation how to set this up, how to also create such a self-signed certificate via a PowerShell script. So this works. You get like this PFX file and a CER file. And what you have to do actually now is, you set up the service principal. You give it like delegated or not delegated. You give it application permissions to actually have access to SharePoint sites. So you select SharePoint permissions and give like control, or at least read and write rights on those SharePoint sites. And actually what you need to do is like, put this certificate to your service principal. So I'll show you this directly in my Entra ID. So I have like the service principal over here. If I go to certificates and secrets, I actually have to add this certification file over here to work. And the other thing you need to do is basically set these API permissions. So you want to add a permission to allow connect to SharePoint, use application permissions, and actually select those read and write all or manage all permissions. And obviously, if you added this, you need to grant admin consent to actually activate it. So this is actually required to give the service principal the enough permissions to actually connect to this API. Also, the code is a little bit different than calling normal APIs, because here you actually have to build this identity or this credential client here, not with a client secret credential, which takes like tenant ID, client ID, and a client secret, but actually you have to give it this certificate file, specifically this PFX file. This PFX file is also, when you create it, you create it with a specific password. So you basically have this kind of multi-factor thing. Yeah, you have the certification file and the password. So something you need to have, something you need to know, and this gives it like this extra kind of security. The code now, this user data function, what do you have to do? I mean, you have to build this certificate credential. So you need to know like the tenant ID, the client ID of this service principal. And now you need to have access to this certificate. So you can directly place files here in this user data function. So what I have done is basically I use the option to have a connection to a lakehouse, and with a lakehouse comes data lake storage. So I create a connection here to a lakehouse, which I specifically created for this purpose in the same workspace. And within this lakehouse, so I'm looking at my workspace now, I have this lakehouse over here. It's completely empty. But in the files section, in a subfolder secrets, I have this pfx file. This is my certificate. I also store my secrets here, not plain in the codes, but having like this JSON file here in the same place. So I want to keep this lakehouse obviously very secure, as it contains those secrets relevant for the connection. But with the attachment of connecting to this lakehouse, I can now fetch the secrets and read the JSON files out of there. And I can also read this secrets file, read it basically as a byte string, and then use like certificate data to actually use this bytes object and actually use this effect certificate directly over the the rest of the stuff is pretty straightforward. They're getting a bearer token for this or via the certificate credential, and then I'm just posting this REST API call. It's basically the same thing which the Logic app does, just like this authentication is a little bit more tricky. But in the end, it's doing the same kind of post request to create that new list item as the Logic app does. I mean, I can test this obviously. So I have this in the same code. I will also share the code in my GitHub repo, and I'm putting the link to that in the description of this video. So I have this two function here, write to SharePoint, write to SharePoint SPN. So if I change this now in my Power BI report, I can just say I want to use a different data function. I have to reassign the task, the variables now, and then I can just run the code again. So I'm putting in some new tasks over here, deleting these values. Let's say make a video assignee would be my mom, and then I give it some budget whatsoever. And now I have all the values here, so I can trigger that. So eventually the request is submitted. It gives you the output of this user data function. Here it actually refreshed my data, but I mean, it's import mode, so I eventually have to refresh here to see the latest data, and I see, okay, that data was just written a couple of seconds ago. I mean, you can double check that looking at my SharePoint list over here, doing a refresh, and I see make a video, and this task is over there. So this basically wraps it up already. So I showed you two ways how to make this connection to the SharePoint and to write back to the SharePoint lists using either Logic app and do like the easy connection there. The more sophisticated or more elegant one would probably be using the REST APIs. It needs, or at least it took me quite some while to manage that correctly, to set this up properly, that the service principal has the correct permissions, has this certification authorization flow. Also, you need to add like this temporary storage that's actually mandatory to somehow get the certification file into the user data function. But in the end, it's basically more the sophisticated way, I would say. So you have these two options now. I share the code of these user data functions and the links for all the documentation I used in the description of this video. I hope you learned something today. You find some new inspiration. If you like videos like that, give me a like, subscribe to the channel. If you have new ideas, problems that need to be solved, drop me a message, let me know. Thanks for watching and see you then. Bye.